This is a Global News special presentation.
Today is the day when people from across Canada will take a moment to reflect and to say thank you. These are live pictures from the National War Memorial in Ottawa. We will be bringing you the ceremony from there this morning. It begins in about half an hour. This is the first ceremony in a while to take place without public health restrictions in place. So you can see there's a full marching parade this year. That had been set aside the last few years. Now we're back to seeing those veterans in their dress uniforms with their medals. It is a cloudy Friday morning in November in Ottawa, but it's not cold, and that's a relief. Everyone doesn't have to be bundled up in big winter coats and scarves and hats. It's about 13 degrees in Ottawa. A larger crowd than usual has gathered. It's certainly usual than what we've seen in the past couple of years. Good morning, I'm Donna Friesen. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, we will pause to remember and to pay tribute to those who have died in military service. There are services at cenotaphs across the country today, of course. This one in Ottawa is always a moving one. Every year, there are fewer of the older veterans there. The average age of veterans from the Second World War is 96. From the Korean War, it's 89. Of course, there is a younger generation now, those who served in Afghanistan and for whom war is not a distant memory. Earlier this morning, another ceremony was held in Ottawa, not far away from that cenotaph you just saw. It's at the National Aboriginal Veterans Monument. It was erected in 2001 to pay tribute to the thousands of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations veterans who served in war and on peacekeeping missions. Indigenous veterans very often did not get respect. They were discriminated against. Many had to hide their cultural identity for decades. They weren't acknowledged on November 11th and faded into obscurity. Well, this monument is for them. It was built by an artist whose father served in the Second World War. And in a little bit, some of those veterans will tell us what it means to them and why they came out for that ceremony. First, though, let's go to our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stevenson. Mercedes is near the National War Memorial. Good morning. You're not all bundled up in a coat and a scarf as we have so many other days. Mercedes, what's the mood like there today?
You know, people are just so happy to be able to come back out and to acknowledge Remembrance Day. And for many of these elderly veterans, you can imagine COVID was a very serious risk. So for them to be able to parade here, especially when we just don't have that many of our Second World War veterans left with us anymore, is a really special day. There's lots of people out here. It's warm, it's not raining, and all of those things are great for those elderly vets so that they can be acknowledged. Now, they're so tough. Even when it is freezing, they are here if it's minus 20, but it's nice when it's above 10 degrees instead.
Certainly is. Mercedes, this hasn't been an easy time for the Canadian Armed Forces. It's having trouble recruiting. We know there are allegations of misconduct, sexual harassment, systemic racism, a lot going on. You spoke with General Wayne Eyre earlier this morning. What did he have to say?
I did, Donna. It's a tough time to be the Chief of the Defence Staff, whether it's the international environment or internal struggles. And of course, as a soldier, he's thinking about those who he lost today too. Here's the interview I had with him just a few moments ago. General Wayne Eyre, Chief of the Defence Staff, thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Well, thanks for having me, Mercedes.
You are obviously a veteran. You're in uniform. You have that incredible rack of medals. I remember you as a combat commander in Afghanistan. Who do you think about when you're at this ceremony today?
So I think about the soldiers we lost in Afghanistan. I think about all those who didn't come back. I think about what they stood for, the values that they portrayed, that they embraced, serving this country, the selfless service, the courage, the valor, the dedication to duty. There's a panoply of emotions that one feels on a day like today.
The world is a difficult place right now. It's a difficult place for the Canadian Armed Forces, too, coming out of the sexual misconduct scandal, trying to rebuild, the lack of personnel, operating in a changing strategic environment. What are you thinking about as the Chief of Defence Staff when we're looking not just at our past conflicts, but our potential future conflicts and challenges for the military?
Well, we're facing an increasingly dangerous world, and so I worry about readiness. I worry about our ability to respond. I worry about the sense of urgency that we need to rebuild the Canadian Armed Forces to face this increasingly dangerous world, one that is characterized by confrontation. Hey, let's face it, our national prosperity, our ability to live prosperous lives is underpinned by stability in the international order. That order is under threat. So we have to collectively deter and defend that order, along with our like-minded allies.
Do you think that, the people who are here today, and we have these incredible freedoms because people like you have served in uniform, are cognizant of this changing world that we're living in?
So Canada, we've been very lucky. Three oceans, benevolent superpower to the south. But the world is changing around us, and we need to realize that our security is under increasing threat. Our national prosperity is under increasing threat, so we have to do our part to protect it.
What is your message to men and women who are serving in uniform today and those who have served?
We are proud of you. We are proud of what you've accomplished. We are proud of who you are, and we are proud of what you're going to do. The country is going to be calling upon you more and more in the future, and so I ask you to be ready. Embrace the values that so many that we remember today live by, that service to our country, that willingness to protect our democracy, which is so in need today.
General Eyre, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your service, sir.
Thanks, Mercedes.
There you have it, Donna. A general who certainly knows what it is like to fight, and now the very different environment as we have a Remembrance Day while there is a land war in Europe. People thinking about that international environment and what their service could mean perhaps very differently.
Yes, Mercedes Stevenson, we're going to come back to you in a little bit. Thank you. Let's hear from some of the people now who were at the ceremony that was held earlier at the National Aboriginal Veterans Monument. We spoke to some of them this morning.
Today, Remembrance Day, I just want to bring awareness, that Indigenous soldiers fought and these warriors here, that today is just an act of remembrance that, that we fought then, that we're still here today and we're still serving.
I have a grandfather who passed away in the Second World War, so being part of Remembrance Day ceremonies is, something that I do in honor of his memory.
I was at first found it challenging to talk about my culture, but as I've been supported throughout my time in the military, I've been able to really truly shine with my culture. I'm able to proudly stand here with the Canadian Armed Forces Eagle staff. I think it's very important because Indigenous people in Canada have always thought protecting this land was a sacred duty and an obligation, and I'm honored to stand here for them. The fact that we're both here today representing our communities is an amazing thing. Going forward, education is one of the strongest tools that we have that I'm happy to be able to support and stand proud as an Indigenous man in the military.
I'm Indigenous myself as a Red River Métis from St. Laurent, so it's important for me to attend an event like this as an RCMP member, and especially being allowed to wear my Métis sash at the same time. So I get to show that, and it just means a lot to be here and be a part of this, and to show my respect to the Indigenous veterans in the past and present that have been serving Canada.
Some of the voices from the National Aboriginal Veterans Monument. A service was held there earlier this morning.
Others are watching at home.
So we're going to see in a little while the Veterans Affairs Minister arrive at the National War Memorial. He's here today because the Prime Minister is not. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is on his way to Asia for some summit meetings there, so he'll be represented today by the Veterans Affairs Minister. We'll also see the Silver Cross Mother arrive, and of course the Governor General, Mary Simon. As we wait for that to begin, let's go to Dean Oliver. He is the acting Vice President and Director General at the Canadian War Museum, always our guest on Remembrance Day. Dean, thank you so much for being here with us again today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I know you were also at the service at the National Aboriginal Veterans Monument. Help us understand some of the background there, the history behind it, and of the thousands of Indigenous people who have served and continue to serve.
Well, thank you. Yes, I was there. I have been there for numerous times. I've gone, sometimes very small crowd, sometimes very cold crowd, as you pointed out earlier, but very important for people to attend and to know the history of Indigenous warfare, Indigenous military past, and also the Indigenous contributions past and present to the Canadian Armed Forces and to our own security. Part of that, of course, is a question of remembrance wrapped up in the events of today. Part of it is a question of reconciliation, trying to acknowledge and recognize what has happened in the relationships between First Peoples and other Canadians. But it's also a question of content and maybe some context, Donna. The content, of course, of contributions of the known people like Francis Pego-Magabo and Tommy Prince, but also the context of this extraordinary act of service for peoples that were very, very often horribly treated in this country, in many ways continue to be treated that way, and what that service meant to them personally, to their communities and their lives, and also what it meant after they came back. Many of them were, for example, residential school survivors who later served. It really is a remarkable story. And I was also very happy to see the Global crew there this morning, as they were last year, interviewing the folks you just highlighted. Just wonderful to see.
Yeah, well, so important, and we want to hear from those people, elevate those voices. Dean, every year we see fewer and fewer veterans from the Second World War, and it is such a reminder of time passing. It's been 80 years now since the Dieppe raid in northern France, a battle that I think 5,000 Canadians were involved in, turned out to be our military's darkest day of that war. Allied forces had retreated from Western Europe, and the Nazis occupied at that point almost all of Europe. And on August 19th, 1942, Canadian troops landed in Dieppe to try to change that. Can you remind us of what that day was like?
I'll certainly try. It was a day of horror. Almost everything that could possibly have gone wrong did. Hindsight, of course, is always 20/20, but it's pretty clear that the planning for the mission was optimistic in extremis. The margins for error were pretty small, and many of the things that have been considered necessary in the original planning, like large numbers of heavy bombers and heavy warships to support the mission, in the end turned out not to be available. So the beaches stretched over several kilometers, had various degrees of success and failure, but mostly failure. And the cost was hundreds of Canadians killed, more than 900, twice as many wounded or captured. And in the end, it was a proper disaster. One of the things that came out of that was the notion that some planning activities needed to be different for D-Day, but in the end, it was pretty difficult to hide the fact that this was one of the worst disasters in Canada's military history, not just of the war.
All right. That's 80 years ago today. Dean Oliver, we're going to come back to you in a little bit. Thanks. And as we watch more people beginning to arrive and get into place for this ceremony, our Mike Armstrong is in the crowd. Good morning, Mike. I know you've been talking to some people who are there for the ceremony. What are they telling you?
Representing the Parliament of Canada.
Yeah, I don't want to make too big a deal about the weather, but it's something people talk about because it is not usually this nice. A lot of people that I've been speaking to here are here for the first time. The gentleman over here actually has been here many, many times, he said, probably with one of the youngest people for Remembrance Day. What's the weather like normally on this day?
It's normally absolutely miserable. Seeing snow and cold. Soldiers are shivering. Everybody's just unhappy.
Yeah.
Today's glorious.
It feels, normal Remembrance Day, it almost feels like somber because of the weather. This is nice.
This is very nice.
Yeah. Also, Donna, speaking to people around here, here's another couple I spoke to and met earlier, and I'm going to let you meet them very briefly. 34 years of service, I believe, is what you said?
Yeah, we each served 34.
34 years. And how many tours between you?
I have 6, and my husband has 3.
Ouch. That's incredible. Thank you for your service.
Thank you so much.
That said, you're here for a special reason?
I am. My son is now serving, and he's in the Air Force platoon. He's a loadmaster in Trenton, and he's marching on the parade, so I'm quite proud.
And as I understand, he's headed somewhere very soon as well.
Next year he's going to be going to Scotland in support of the war in Ukraine.
Excellent.
With the Hercules aircrafts.
Best of luck with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Don, I'll leave you with this. The gentleman here served with the United Nations for how long?
Combien d'années? J'étais près de 42 ans désormais.
42 years in the Canadian Forces, and he's here with his grandson with the United Nations beret and the medals. Very special. Nice to see you here. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your service, and always special to be here in the crowd, Donna. Back to you.
It is. There's so many families with such a legacy, a history, and out there today, I guess, reminding their younger family members about what serving in the military is all about and the sacrifice of those who came before. As we wait for the ceremony to begin, the Prime Minister would normally be arriving around this time. He's not here. He left late last night for Cambodia, where he is attending the Southeast Asian Nations Summit. So Lawrence Macaulay, who is the Veterans Affairs Minister, will represent the federal government today. And Justin Trudeau's wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, along with their son Xavier, will also be here. Another guest of honor is the National Silver Cross Mother, who represents all mothers who have lost a child who is serving in the military. This year's Silver Cross Mother is Candy Greff from Lacombe, Alberta. Her son, 28-year-old Master Corporal Byron Greff, was the last Canadian soldier to die in Afghanistan. I met Candy in late October in Alberta. She told me about her son and the heavy burden she is honored to bear. He wore his Canadian military uniform with such pride, his mother Candy tells me. Now it's one of the few tangible ways she has left to remember her son, Byron.
I want to hold my head up high, walk tall, because that's what Byron would do, and that's what he would want me to do. Mom, be proud, and I am.
He was her eldest child, good at hockey, mischievous, and goal-oriented.
He was determined and funny. We all miss that laugh.
As a teenager, Byron signed up for cadets, though the family had no history of serving in the military.
And then along came grade 12, and he said, I would like to join the military.
But did you think immediately that might mean he would be deployed at some stage in his life?
It did cross my mind. It did. And then I just trusted that the military would train him, and they did. They trained him very well.
His first mission to Afghanistan was in 2007. It was a dangerous time.
Oh my goodness, yes. That phone would ring, or I would see the news and I would see something had happened, and your stomach just turns. And you think, please, please.
Byron made it home from that mission. By then, he was a dad. He doted on his young son, Keller, got married to the boy's mother, Lindsay, and in October of 2011 made sure he was home for the birth of their daughter, Brielle. This is the only photo they have of the three of them. 2 weeks later, what Byron's mother feared happened.
Now, heavy black smoke could be seen from most of the city.
The armored NATO bus he was on was hit by a suicide car bomb packed with 700 kilos of explosives. He was one of 17 people killed. He wasn't even in active combat then. He was training Afghan soldiers. That whole period must be a blur.
It is. Yeah. I think a person stays in shock. And sometimes when I think about it, I feel like I'm back in shock again.
11 years have passed since his casket came home. Byron is now buried in the cemetery in the town where he grew up, near a memorial to all the 158 Canadian soldiers who died in Afghanistan. Her son, the last one killed, the final inscription.
They're all so important, each and every one of them. I believe there's a bond between all of the Silver Cross families. I want to do him proud and represent people as they should be for all of the pain that connects us.
All the pain that connects us. That's Candy Greff arriving now at the ceremony in Ottawa. The Silver Cross Mother. She told me that she would be nervous on this day, but also intended to stand proud, to be proud, to walk proud, not just for her son, who was the last soldier, Canadian soldier killed in Afghanistan, but for all 158 soldiers who died, and for their parents, their mothers in particular, the Silver Cross Mother representing all mothers who lost children in service to the military. So as she makes her way to take the stand there, we will soon see the Governor General arriving, Mary Simon. This is her, I think, second ceremony as Governor General. And she is, of course, King Charles's third King Charles III's representative here in Canada. There is Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, the wife of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Lawrence Macaulay, who is the Veterans Affairs Minister, and Xavier Trudeau is next to Sophie, that's their eldest son.
Governor General of Canada. Mesdames et Messieurs, Son Excellence, la très honorable Mary Simon, Gouverneur Général du Canada.
And arriving now, the Governor General. She issued a statement just before this ceremony, and she said, time and again, our members in uniform have shown their courage and resilience. Our troops contributed to victories in 2 world wars at Vimy Ridge and Passchendaele, Normandy and Dieppe, and in many other conflicts. We earned the respect of our allies and found our voice and footing on the world stage. Today, the Governor General is wearing the uniform of the Army. She's there with her husband, Whit Fraser. They will make their way to the dais and be in place for the ceremony to begin in about 10 minutes from now. Let's go to Mercedes Stephenson, who is nearby. Mercedes, you spoke with the Veterans Affairs Minister, Lawrence Macaulay. What is he thinking about today?
Well, thinking about all the veterans who are here, and, you know, a really difficult file that he has, Donna, and one that the government has come under criticism for. It's just such a different world now with so many young veterans from Afghanistan, Iraq, and going forward from other missions around the world, including things like the pandemic here at home that have had a different level of stress. And it's up to him to make sure that those veterans are looked after. I spoke with him just a few moments ago, and here's what he had to say. Minister Lawrence Macaulay, thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
It's my pleasure indeed, an important day.
It's a really beautiful day, which is nice for the elderly veterans when they come out here, but also the first time since the pandemic that people have been able to gather in the way that they used to for this. The first time we'll see the Veterans Parade since the pandemic. What are your thoughts that you're reflecting on as you watch the crowds and the many veterans here in Ottawa who are gathering today?
Well, I have attended many of those veterans commemorating events, and like we didn't have it for 3 years. The veterans couldn't march. Today we see all the crowd of people coming around. It looks like we're going to be somewhat close to normal. It's so wonderful. It gives such a sense of pride to veterans, which they so much deserve.
When you are up here observing the ceremony, as the minister who's in charge of looking after veterans, what are you thinking about?
Well, of course, today I've been asked that question a number of times, and it's what you reflect is when you walk through the cemeteries in the Commonwealth war graves, and to see young people, 18, 19, and 20, they paid the ultimate sacrifice, so you can ask me whatever you like, and we have peace and freedom in this country, and I just spoke to some veterans, some young people, which is so important to get the young people involved, and that's another story. I think we're doing much better in that area. It's groups that's doing much better. There's organizations, and I've just indicated to them, just say thank you to a veteran when you meet them. You see somebody in uniform, say thank you. We have the peace and freedom because of those people.
What message do you have for veterans today, sir?
Well, the first message I would have today, of course, would be thank you so much. For me, it's a great honor to be able to represent veterans and see that we provide them as much as possible with comfort. For the ones that come back with a lot of scars, and it's so important that we make sure they live as good a life as they possibly can. And that's my responsibility and my honor to do it.
Minister of Veterans Affairs Lawrence Macaulay, thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
A great privilege indeed. Thank you, Mercedes.
Donna, so lovely to see all of the veterans who are here today able to attend in person. And we saw the Veterans Parade go by, something we haven't seen since 2019. A few other changes this year. We'll sing God Save the King for the first time instead of God Save the Queen. So quite the ceremony today, and thousands of people here, including many, many vets.
All right, Mercedes Stephenson, thanks. You're looking at the Governor General there, Mary Simon, speaking with the other assembled guests on the, it's Chief of Defence Staff Wayne Eyre. And soon they'll be in place to begin this ceremony, which starts with O Canada. That'll be in about 3 minutes from now. As we wait for that, let's go back to historian Dean Oliver of the Canadian War Museum. Dean, Wayne Eyre talked about readiness and worrying about readiness in the Canadian Armed Forces. I know we're expecting a flypast a little later of CF-18s, and that sort of makes you think, wow, they have been flying, I think, for 40 years now. We've been talking about replacing them for so long. Tell me a bit about the CF-18s.
Well, at this point, I don't think the CF-18s owe us very much. They've been in service for 40 years this year. The discussion about them dates back into the 1970s, and they reflect a generation of military hardware and equipment that we acquired in the dark days of the deep Cold War, 1970s. That included them and various other armored vehicles to try to make sure that security, particularly in Western Europe, but also in Northern Canada, were effectively maintained. We're now approaching a point in history where decisions need to be made, including that about the CF-18s as to what goes next. And of course, the F-35 is what is in our immediate future. So the non-flesh and blood veterans that we might see today, at some point, will be in museums in terms of the CF-18 fleet. 3 or 4 already are, but it is a major change in terms of what the Canadian Armed Forces will look like in the decades to come.
Yeah, and I guess part of this ceremony, Dean, every year is not just it's all about looking back and being thankful and remembering those who have served and lost their lives, but it's also a reminder of the importance of a national defense, of having a military in place.
It is. The national defense has gone through its eras. I mean, it began in the early part of the 20th century as largely a singular department, and later became national defense that we know, which turns 100 this year, and will soon have to deal with some other issues, including those surrounding information warfare and what the next generation of conflicts look like.
Yeah. Lots of challenges. Dean Oliver, we will come back to you. Let's now listen in to O Canada.
The Canadian Armed Forces and the Ottawa Children's Choir. Mesdames et Messieurs, au Canada, avec des membres de la musique centrale des Forces armées canadiennes et du Chœur des enfants d'Ottawa.
Remembrance Day Parade, action!
The trumpeter will now perform the last post, followed by 2 minutes of silence. And as we wait for the trumpeter to play the rouse, you see the flypast by CF-18 Hornets based in Bagotville, Quebec. Next is the reciting of the Act of Remembrance.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Ils ne vieilliront pas comme nous qui leur avons survécu.
Grow not old.
Ils ne connaîtront jamais
that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Apu nida chika chisheniwit miam china. E quando uccechi inuia apuki nishtuapaku kamamiche monandi pietu te makani netenika miam te pishkaniti no quanito watuashqua kona anitam nika chisituana anitam chika chisituana.
Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
In respecting belief and conscience, I invite you to take this moment for reflection. Aujourd'hui, nous rendons hommage aux hommes et aux femmes.
We give thanks for the women and men of every generation who have answered the call to serve our country, and for those who stand on guard today. Each sacrifice is etched in the cement that shapes the peace of our country, and thus cannot be forgotten. So, as Canada comes together today, may we be filled with inspiration and admiration for those who have given so much.
We remember the 80th anniversary of the Dieppe Raid and Operation Jubilee. So too, we remember the service of those whose contribution have only now been recognized by Hall, the number 2 Construction Battalion. Aussi, c'est avec une profonde gratitude.
It is with deep gratitude that we remember our veterans and serving members who suffer physical or psychological injuries. May they find healing and peace.
We are forever grateful for the families who have supported and suffered along with service members. They are a source of strength and care that is indispensable and invaluable. We ask for strength for the leaders of the world and for those of our country, for our sovereign, Charles II, King of Canada, who continues to mourn the loss of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. For the Governor General, the Prime Minister, and the Chief of the Defense Staff. May they guide us with wisdom during times of both war and peace. In a world fraught with struggle and instability, where war continues to rage in Ukraine, we gather to affirm with one another our determination to remove the barriers of division in a spirit of reconciliation. We seek dialogue with one another in all spheres, social, political, and religious, that in doing so, we may achieve a lasting peace. May we all strive to continue our efforts to build a better world, lest we forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice-Regal Party will now begin placing their wreaths. Mesdames et messieurs, le cortège vice-royal.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Vice-Regal Party will now start placing their wreaths.
That's the Governor General, Mary Simon, her husband, Whit Fraser, laying a wreath. And you can hear the Ottawa Children's Choir singing In Flanders Field as these wreaths are laid. Let's just listen for a moment. That song In Flanders Field, always so moving. Originally a poem, of course, written by Canadian John McCrae in World War I. It's touched a chord with so many people over the years, still recited and sung to this day. And as we watch the wreaths continue to be laid at the National War Memorial, let's go back to Dean Oliver from the Canadian War Museum. Dean, tell us about the rituals of remembrance, the wreath laying, why this aspect is so important.
Oh, thank you, Donna. It comes at the end of a period of about 6 or 7 minutes in the service, each stage of which is deeply symbolic. The wreath itself, of course, is a symbol of the beauty of life and circular to speak to the union of life and perhaps resurrection. dates back to ancient Greek times, but in order, there is the last post, the 2 minutes of silence, the lament, the rouse, and then the act of remembrance. And very briefly, the last post signaling that not everyone has come home at end of day. The 2 minutes of silence to allow respect for those who have been lost. The lament, played the official lament to the Canadian Forces, which is the Flowers of the Forest, dates back to 17th or maybe even 16th century Scotland to mimic the sound of grief, the wailing of families across the Highlands as news of the dead came home, followed by the rouse, which is the call to duty again at morning, and then the act of remembrance. Despite everything that has passed, we will commit to remembering them, and that's followed by the laying of those beautiful wreaths, a symbol of life, remembrance, and resurrection.
And in Flanders Fields is the song that always touches me, I think, the most through this. Hearing children's voices sing it, especially.
It is so deeply resonant of all of the acts of the First and Second World Wars, but in particular the First. Mr. McCrae, his connection to Canadian units, the friendships of war, his own death, and how that was commemorated and brought across not only Canada but the entire empire in the late 19-teens and 1920s to be the symbol that it is today, and the union of it with the poppy as perhaps the most powerful symbols of remembrance the world over.
It is the reason we wear the poppy.
Indeed.
Yes. All right. We'll continue to watch the Vice-Regal Party here lay wreaths. Wreath laying now by members of First Nations, Indigenous and Inuit groups, veterans who served and are remembering today as well. In front of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, there you can just see it in front of the Indigenous veterans. And we'll get a better shot of it in a moment, but it's a flag that's been at the center of a sort of multi-decade mystery. And as we continue to watch wreaths being laid, let's go to Mike Armstrong. You're there in the crowd, Mike. I know you've investigated, found out what this flag is all about. You can see it in a frame in front of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I think it was carried during the Dieppe raid in northern France that Dean and I talked about earlier, which became Canada's deadliest day of the Second World War. Walk us through the history of that flag's origin.
Yeah, it's a pretty incredible story. It was actually donated to the Royal Canadian Legion by a family, the Lowrys, out of Lexington, Virginia. Now, here's the legend. The Lowrys, Charles Lowry, got it, the late Charles Lowry, who gave it to his son. Charles Lowry got it from a friend at a garage sale. The friend had finished his garage sale and was going to get rid of it, and he said, well, I'll take it. Now, that friend had been a veteran who had been, at the end of the Second World War, working in a POW camp. That veteran had gotten it, the flag, from a German soldier who had been on a burial detail in Dieppe in 1942 after the raid. and he told him that he had gotten the flag from a fallen Canadian soldier. Now, if the story ended there, it would be interesting enough, a flag that was on the beach in Dieppe in 1942. But there is a little bit more. That flag in 1942 was already 70 years old. You can tell by the symbols in the shield that it's from the early 1870s, the period just after Manitoba became a province and before British Columbia became a province. So it predates the raid by 70 years. So there's a mystery. Why was the flag in Dieppe? Who took it there and why? But there's also some pride. I sent Mr. Lowry some pictures of the flag here at the ceremony today. He couldn't be happier that his father's flag is being respected, honored in this way, and part of such an important service. And I'll also say he wanted to come, but unfortunately his wife organizes their local Veterans Day service in Lexington, Virginia, Donna.
All right, Mike Armstrong, thanks. Let's go back to Dean Oliver. Dean, as we watched while Mike was talking, we continued to see veterans lay wreaths, including a number of Aboriginal, Inuit, and First Nations veterans, playing more of a role in this ceremony than they have in the past. And certainly we know that there are so many stories of people having to hide their cultural identity in order to serve in the Canadian military in the past.
Well, Remembrance evolves, and it has become a far bigger tent than it once was, not only embracing ethnocultural communities and stories, but also entire branches and activities that were critical to war efforts, but were perhaps not recognized as being strictly veterans at the time. The Merchant Navy comes to mind, firefighters in wartime. So the arc of Remembrance is expanding, as are the techniques and tools of doing it. Digital outreach, accessible programs and platforms. I mean, the world has provided all kinds of an almost endless variety of ways in which to reflect and remember, but the heart of it still remains thinking a thought yourself, communing with it in heart and head, figuring out what it means for you, and if it means something for you, what then do you go and do about it? What active remembrance do you as an individual make as the world changes around you and we try to remember to understand who we are?
It is a collective experience, but it is an individual one as well, isn't it? And that's, I know, something that you're very involved in thinking about at the Canadian War Museum is how to keep history alive, how to transfer that knowledge to younger generations.
We certainly try, as do many others in our area of work. Donna, it's it really we do operate a wholesale. Of course, we deal on paint on a large canvas. We speak to hundreds of thousands, but in the end, we're trying to educate, entertain, and inspire one person, one visitor at a time. Whether that person walks in the door for the first time or the 100th, or whether they visit the website for the first time or the 100th, we're in the business of very gently but very definitely trying to affect their life and in positive ways. And we hope that us being on programs like yours helps us to do that as well.
Well, we certainly appreciate having you. Dean Oliver, thanks so much. Let's head back to the ceremony where Mike Armstrong is. Mike, I know you've been hearing from some other veterans this morning. What have they been telling you?
Yeah, it's one of those things, actually, walking through the crowd, more so than in other years in the past. I notice a lot of people wearing medals very proudly. Some of our colleagues were out earlier and spoke to some of the veterans who were here today for Remembrance Day.
As an ex-soldier, remembering those that went before and the sacrifices, and having served on a peacekeeping mission with other soldiers, remembering those that were in a combat zone, as Afghanistan, remembering them is very, very important. Very, very important. And this is the first time my grandson Mason has been here, and I want him to learn about these things and appreciate what has happened. So that's the main thing. And having not been able to do it for a couple of years, it's nice to be back in person.
It's nice to be able to be back here. I did this for many, many decades. Actually, I all those decades when I was serving as one of the pipers on parade, and we used to bring up the vets. And when I finally got to retire, I said, well, maybe it's my turn to be one of the vets now. Anyway, marching days are done. So here we are. And I'm glad, I give thanks that I am able to be here. And think of many who aren't. We've lost a lot, even during the pandemic. I now do funerals at the National Military Cemetery and burying a lot of vets there too.
My grandfather fought in the First World War. He came back not quite the same, and I had other relatives who were killed in the Second and never did come home. So at a family level, it's a personal thing. And then, of course, we had over 1 million men and women put on a uniform in the last century plus, and more than 120,000 never came home. So I think all Canadians need to find some place and some moment to remember on this day.
As that gentleman said, it's hard to be here, probably impossible to be here and not think of the people who served for us. For example, I often think of my grandfather, late grandfather. I was also lucky enough to spend 2 Remembrance Days with our troops in Afghanistan, but being here in Ottawa on this day is always incredibly special. Donna?
We're glad you're there, Mike. Thank you. Let's check in one more time with Mercedes Stevenson. Mercedes, I know you stay in contact with many veterans throughout the year, not just on Remembrance Day. But what have some of the people you're in touch with been telling you today?
It's been a very tough year for a lot of veterans. They're watching what's happening in Ukraine and they're remembering their time in Afghanistan or in Iraq. And by the way, some have served in Ukraine as well. We had a Canadian military mission there for many years, and the Canadian Special Operations Forces were there and remain there, helping to get equipment and things into the country. They're not engaged in combat. But they're very aware of this world that we are living in, Donna, where things are changing, and they feel that calling to service, even though in many cases they're now out of uniform. There's also been the difficulty of what happened with Afghanistan. It was such a tremendous morale blow for so many who gave their mental health, their limbs, their friends' lives to be there. And they now are wondering what that all was for. And I've really heard a lot of them who struggle quite deeply with that, who struggle now with finding meaning in their service. And of course, there's the ongoing challenges set Veterans Affairs to process disability claims quickly enough. These are tough and expensive times, and taking weeks and weeks and weeks to process a claim can be very difficult. The thing I think that's the most concerning I hear from a lot of veterans is they worry they have been forgotten by the government and by Canadians. So any chance you have to thank a veteran, to reach out to veterans who you know, I think it would mean a lot to them. These are people who have made incredible sacrifices, and those sacrifices didn't stop when they left the battlefield. I know of 4 troops and veterans who have lost their lives by suicide in the last few weeks alone. This is an ongoing, very serious situation, and the need for mental health support and remembrance is very and for those who are trying to support them and are affected by that too, Donna. So as you can imagine, a lot of things for veterans to think about, and the more I think that they realize and feel the Canadians appreciate and understand their service, the more that it potentially can really help them. So it might seem like a little thing to say thank you for your service, and I know they will all tell you they don't like that, they don't want that, they don't ask for it, but it is really meaningful. And it's also meaningful for us to make sure that they are getting the services that they have been promised and that they need.
Right, Mercedes Stevenson, thank you. You can hear the benediction underway behind Mercedes there. This ceremony will continue in Ottawa now, and others, of course, will take place at cenotaphs across the country today. This concludes our coverage of the Remembrance Day service at the National War Memorial in Ottawa. Thanks to all of you for joining us, for all of our correspondents, Mercedes and Mike, and of course, Dean Oliver from the Canadian War Museum, and for all of you taking time with us to remember and to reflect. I'm Donna Friesen. I'll be back with all of the day's news tonight on Global National. For now, goodbye from Ottawa.
To burn the flag. We live in a country where we are able to take this cherished ideal for granted.